What's the matter, Rob? You don't like critics? Don't we make you laugh? Aren't we fucking funny? What is up, everybody, and welcome to my Rob Zombie ranking, talking about all 8 of his theatrically released movies from worst to best. And I am not going on this blood-soaked adventure alone. This is a collaborative effort with Rudy from Gen X Reviews and my buddy CP from Williscredia, and both of their video links will be down in the video description below. They're live at the same exact time as this one, so once you see where I rank these 8 movies, go ahead, click their videos, subscribe to their awesome channels, and see where their opinions differ. Now, I need to say this right off of the bat. For those that haven't watched my channel, for those that are maybe finding me for the first time or have not seen the all 8 movie reviews that I have done in Rob Zombie's filmography, I'm not the biggest fan of his work as a filmmaker. I think he's an awesome director. I think he's got massive talent as far as visuals, as far as style, as far as just having an eye for what to do with the camera, but his script writing predominantly is what lets me down in pretty much every single one of these movies to varying degrees. So if you are a Rob Zombie fanatic, and you're going to get mad and pissy and hot and bothered about any criticism whatsoever towards these movies, this is not the video for you, because I promise you this ranking, it's going to be fucking weird. And I really don't know what the popular answer is for the worst movies of Rob Zombie's. I know everybody's favorite picks as far as which ones I see everybody praising the most, but there seems to be about 5 to 6 of these movies that I see in equal amounts everybody saying is clearly his worst film. So I don't know how controversial this list is going to be, but I know the ones at the top are going to piss a few people off. So what I'm trying to say is, if you can't appreciate subjectivity and tolerate other people's opinions, fuck your mama, fuck your sister, and most of all, fuck you. I'm just kidding. Well, enough clowning around. Let's kick this bitch off with number 8. This, by far, is the worst of his films. In my opinion, it's the one that I really can never see myself rewatching again. And I think most people, even Rob Zombie fanatics, won't have too hard of a time agreeing with this one. And that's going to be 3 from Hell. Now, what sets this movie apart from all of the other movies, despite how many criticisms I hailed towards all of those, is that this is the only movie on this list that when I watch it, it feels like Rob Zombie himself wasn't even passionate about this idea. I don't know if he was shackled by the studio, if he did it out of obligation because of the financial lack of success of his last few movies. I really don't know. Maybe he was passionate about it and I'm just seeing something that's not there, but this genuinely feels like an idea that was ill-conceived from the start. You had the unfortunate passing of Sid Haig, which made it even worse of an idea while it was being executed, and the final product is just a really shitty sequel that does everything you don't want a sequel to do, plus the absolute worst thing a sequel can do: make the previous movie worse. You have that great ending in The Devil's Rejects, you have that somewhat poetic ending, and then this movie completely fucking undoes that just to do random shit with these 3 characters again. I don't think that it's the best performance out of the 3 people, unfortunately, because Sid Haig was not able to do more than 1 scene in this film because of his health issues. You get Richard Brake in here as the 3rd person from Hell, and unfortunately his character is just too similar to Otis. They're a gigantic Captain Spaulding-sized hole in the heart of this film. I don't like how Baby devolved into being comical and crazy again. That's grating on my nerves. And the movie just didn't really feel like it had much of a point, aside from just, hey, these are my most popular characters, fuck it, we'll do another one. So for all the times that Rob Zombie seems to put his heart and soul into something that just doesn't quite work for me, this is the one time where I feel like his heart and soul just did not show up to work. To be honest with you, the next 3 movies on this list are pretty interchangeable for me. I actually swapped them around twice while I was kind of figuring out my list and becoming comfortable with it. So if you ask me a week from now, this next couple might change. But as of right now, number 7 for me is going to be The Munsters. Now, while I appreciate the fact that Rob Zombie tried to do something different, he tried to do a family-friendly film, this is PG, I know for a fact that he loves and adores and lives and breathes the Munsters, so this was absolutely a dream project for him, a passion project. The passion just doesn't quite come through all that well to me because I don't understand who this movie was for, aside from Rob Zombie. I grew up watching the Munsters. I've watched some of them here recently, and the style of humor back in that old black and white sitcom, I don't think translates well into this modern movie. Maybe it's just the fact that it's written by Rob Zombie, and I don't find him to be a very funny writer. But I think the humor falls on its face all throughout this film. It's a shame that they didn't let him shoot it in black and white because I think that would have added a lot to the charm and to some of the campier aspects to this movie. And I do like the color scheme that we get if it has to be in color. It's very bright and fluorescent and kind of oversaturated to a point of looking like cartoonish, but I kind of appreciated that. And I think that Dan Roebuck was great as the Count. Can't call him Grandpa yet. But he was the one person that really felt like he was tapping into that old style of character and was delivering on that. Jeff Daniel Phillips does okay as far as a physical performance, but I just don't like his voice as Herman Munster. I don't know why they didn't modulate that a little bit. Fred Gwynne has such a signature deep voice that I just think Jeff Daniel Phillips' voice sounds awkward against this big green hulking monster. It just didn't quite work for me. And we're going to talk about this a lot in this ranking, but I did not think Sheri Moon Zombie was very good as Lily Munster. I think she was trying to do an impersonation, but it's such an impersonation that it feels like an impersonation of an impersonation, rather than an actress actually kind of becoming a role and making it her own and doing something with it like Dan Roebuck did. And so every single scene that she's in, and she's in most of them, she kind of just sucks the air out of the room, unfortunately. And I didn't feel the movie had very much of a narrative flow either. It felt like a pilot episode of television, which is fine if you're doing television, but for a movie, you gotta have some kind of a free-flowing narrative there from start to finish. And it's like, it's all about the romance and the meeting of Herman and Lily, and then there's a subplot with the castle, and then in the last half hour, it's about them going to America and getting to Mockingbird Lane, and it just doesn't really feel like a movie narrative. It feels like a bunch of different ideas just kind of thrown in. And so I wanted to love this. I had all the faith in the world that this was going to be the one. This was going to be the one where I look at and say, ha! I told you all he can do a fucking great movie as long as he doesn't do his typical shtick. But unfortunately, it's number 7 for me. Number 6 is going to be House of a Thousand Corpses, his directorial debut, and this is a movie that I think has a lot of promise. It had a lot of potential. There is so many cool visuals. There's so much art direction and set design and character design that I think is badass, and you really feel that music video director kind of coming out in this movie with Rob Zombie and bringing that style to a narrative film. And so there's a lot of things about this, from Captain Spaulding to Dr. Satan to the looks that he goes for in these sets, especially when they descend into the actual House of a Thousand Corpses, that I think is awesome. I think it's arguably his coolest looking film. Unfortunately, it's not really much of a story to talk about here. It's just kind of a carnival ride where you get in, you meet Captain Spaulding, his fried chicken gas station, and his little house of horror history, of killer history, serial killers. Then you go into a Rob Zombie pseudo Texas Chainsaw Massacre farmhouse, and then you go into the lair of Dr. Satan. And for one of the most badass characters that Rob Zombie has ever created, we don't get to learn shit about Dr. Satan. And that's the one character where I watch this movie and I'm like, I want a fucking prequel about him. I want something. Like, that's awesome, and you just barely dipped your toes into it, and then you never mention him again for the rest of the Firefly trilogy. So I genuinely think this had the potential to be a horror classic if he had had a little bit of help in the script writing department. That's kind of a ongoing theme with my thoughts with Rob Zombie movies. But yeah, this one, it just doesn't quite get there for me. Number 5 is going to be 31. Now, those of you that know your Cody Leach history will know that 31 was actually a very early review on this channel, and it's the review that birthed my fuck this movie rating. I got to see this early at a Fathom event, and, well, I guess it wasn't early. I got to see it with everybody else that went to the fucking Fathom event, but I hated this movie when I first saw it. I thought it was absolute trash. There was little to nothing about it that I appreciated, and I disliked it so much that I felt like, at the time, my lowest ranking, Skip It, just didn't quite say it. Now, I will say, I watched this for the second time in preparation for this ranking, and I enjoyed it a little bit more than I did back in the theaters, to the point where it's actually number 5 and not the bottom where I assumed it was going to be. And so I'm going to have to retract that. I don't think it's a fuck this movie for me anymore. I actually think it's probably a stream it, a low stream it. But nonetheless, 31 has all of the problems of all of the Rob Zombie movies, at least my problems. I think that the script writing is very rough in this one. I think that the characters are underdeveloped, and some of them are not even really that interesting to follow, both on the villain side as well as the protagonist side. Really, aside from Richard Brake, there's not really a character in this movie that stands out at all to me. I think that some of the plotting and some of the flow of the narrative as far as just scene to scene, like just the continuity and editing is messy, where you get one character that dies and then they go into a room in the very next scene and somehow he's under the table being eaten. And that's another thing, by the way. Why the fuck would these people that are being locked up for 12 hours to survive in this psychotic game ever trust anything that these fucking people put on a table to put into their mouths? That's a discussion for another time. But aside from all of that stuff that I know I'm going to get when I walk into this because it's written by Rob Zombie, compared to the movies below it, especially the ones that I would say are kind of tied with this, I actually had a decent enough time with the concept, with the plot of this, in as far as just a gnarly little survival slasher type flick, to where you get these people together and it's just fighting and carnage for an hour and a half. I would rather revisit that than House of a Thousand Corpses or the Munsters. And so, shockingly to me, this one moved up the list quite a bit. I think that Richard Brake's performance as Doomhead is genuinely good. I wish we got more with that character. I think that the opening scene, that was kind of the one positive I had back in the day, and it's still a positive, that black and white opening shot where Richard Brake is all up in the camera and he's talking to Dan Roebuck. That's a really good scene that's let down by some zombie dialogue. In hell, everybody loves popcorn. What the fuck does that mean? But yeah, not a great movie. Not one that I would recommend to many people, but I wouldn't hate rewatching it. Coming in at number 4 is going to be Rob Zombie's Halloween. Now, this is a movie, much like a lot of the movies on this list, that I hated the first time that I saw it. I went to see this opening night with my dad, and the only movie we had seen of Rob Zombie's previous to that was Devil's Rejects. And there was a lot more Devil's Rejects in this than Halloween for our tastes. So, Halloween, I've rewatched this movie probably 4 or 5 times. I'm pretty solidified with my thoughts on it. I think that the first act is garbage.
Bitch, I will crawl over there and I will skull fuck the shit out of you!
I hate the dialogue in that first act. The young Michael Myers. I don't even like learning about young Michael Myers. Yes, it's different, it's unique, but to me it ruins the mystique of the character, which is kind of the point of Halloween. All of the dialogue and all the character interactions in this family is just the most chicken fried white trash bullshit that I do not enjoy, and I don't think it has a place in Halloween. So, first act, I can almost skip when I rewatch this film. The second act in the asylum, I think, gets more interesting, but is a huge missed opportunity because there's not enough Michael and Loomis. That's the one piece of the story that we only heard about in exposition and in backstory and in dialogue in the older Halloween films. There was a chance to show these two characters interacting a lot more, and we didn't get a whole lot of that, so I can take or leave the second act. The third act of Halloween, where it's essentially just a really heightened, Rob Zombie-fied version of John Carpenter's flick, I actually enjoy that last third. So this is a movie I don't have too much problem rewatching after the first 30 minutes or so. But to me, this is a movie that has always appealed much more to Rob Zombie fans than it does Halloween fans. Coming in at number 3 is going to be The Lords of Salem. Now, I don't know how unpopular this is going to be having this high, because I know some very passionate folks that despise this movie. But in my own personal opinion, there is no question this is the best work that he has ever done as a director. As a director, somebody who is choosing shots, framing shots, working with cinematographers, pacing, causing a sense of dread. This is the only film in his entire fucking filmography that I would actually say is creepy and unnerving and actually gets under my skin. I think it's very effective for the first 2 acts. Unfortunately, you have that third act that to me is just a jumbled, redundant mess. It's just a bunch of visuals and weird shit. There's a fucking little demon with like dick tentacles that Sherry Moon's holding on to, and it just stretches it out so long and so long to the point where everybody gets it. She's about to be sacrificed. She's about to be the birth mother of the Antichrist. We fucking get it. Just sacrifice the bitch so we can go. And it just drags like a son of a bitch. To the point where if the third act matched the quality of the first 2 acts, I would say this is a resounding number 1. Because to me, this is easily his best work as a horror filmmaker. It's him stepping out of his comfort zone. It's him doing something that is not his typical kind of country fried redneck bullshit. And I think he does a really good job with it for the first 2 acts. I actually think Sherry Moon Zombie gives a pretty good performance in this. It's not outstanding. It's not like Oscar worthy. It's not something where I could see it getting her a lot of work outside of her husband's movies, but For what she typically brings, she's pretty good here for being the central figure. There's a lot of genuinely fucked up, scary scenes in here where she walks past the kitchen and you got that naked witch bitch that's just standing in the corner, just fucking hovering and not moving, where you can almost not see it right away until your eyes are glued to it. I think there's some really good shit in this movie. But unfortunately, it's let down in the last half hour. Number 2 is going to be The Devil's Rejects. Now, I saw this when it first came out. I was only 15, and I didn't like this movie at all. It was just too weird for me. Rob Zombie's style it was not my thing. And so I've taken a long time to warm up to this movie, but especially on my most recent rewatch, I actually think there's a lot to appreciate in this film. I think that there is some genuinely good filmmaking by Rob Zombie. I think that the 3 Firefly characters are at their best in this movie as far as performances, as far as the material that Rob Zombie gives them, as far as his script, as far as their interactions with each other. He does a really interesting thing where he kind of frames these maniacal serial killer psycho fucks as the protagonist of the movie, and has this vengeful sheriff who is clearly in the right kind of framed as the looming villain. And I think he succeeds a lot more than he fails in executing that, to the point where you get to the end, and as despicable as these people are, you do get a little bit of sympathy for them. You do kind of want them to survive just because they're pretty entertaining to watch. And William Forsythe is awesome as Sheriff Wydell. I think that Rob Zombie's signature, like 70s grindhouse throwback kind of style that he has, as far as the filter, as far as the transitions, as far as the editing, actually works the best in this movie. I think it fits as far as this kind of horror version of a road trip of Rio Bravo or a Western standoff flick. And I think it's pretty entertaining all the way through. It doesn't really have any spots where it starts to drop off for me, with the exception of a bit in the middle, just because I feel like the whole second act is just about torturing and brutalizing these people, and it doesn't feel like it has much more of a point aside from just showing brutality. So it's not a movie that's a classic to me. It's not one of my favorites of all time. It's not a movie I'm going to pull off the shelf and rewatch very often, but it is one of his best works. But coming in at number 1, and yes, I know all of you hate me for saying this, is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2.
She did fucking loudmouth. That's all that fucker does is cry.
Now, I understand a lot of the criticisms that are hailed at this. I think that there is some spots where Rob Zombie's script writing shows up here, like with Richard Brake saying fuck like 37 times in one scene. There is certainly still a lot of that kind of country fried, despicable grossness that is in this. That's the tone he set in the first Halloween that doesn't necessarily work for Halloween. I get that. You have Loomis, that is the worst version of Loomis in this entire franchise. I get people kind of bumping up against Scout Taylor Compton's performance as Laurie in this because she's a very unlikable character because of all of her trauma and just how nasty of a person she has become. I get all of that. Oh yeah, and the White Horse, Sherry Moon shit, yeah, that can go fuck itself. No, Rob, no. No, stop it. A lot of the things that you guys hate about this movie, I totally get it. But for me, as somebody that really likes the Halloween franchise, but it's not my favorite, I really appreciate how different and bold and ballsy this movie is. This is the most unique Halloween film in the entire franchise. And I get why that means it's a bad thing. For me, it's a good thing, because when I'm watching through and it's just the same shit over and over again, I actually look forward to rewatching this because Michael is so different, to where he takes the mask off. Sacrilege, I know, I like it. I like the way that it kind of, that's his kill thing, where he puts it on, now I'm in fuck people up mode. I think that it's cool that he grunts while he's stabbing people, brings a little bit of a human edge to him, which I think this version of Michael Myers was going for. I don't think all the versions of Michael have to be the exact same, so I like that. I think that the kills are gnarly as fuck. I mean, this is in competition with Halloween Kills for the goriest and the gnarliest of this franchise, and I think this one might still win out on that competition. I like the fact that it starts to deal with the trauma of the characters, with Laurie Strode and her dealing with this situation, which is pretty fucking horrific, and I think it gives a fairly real-world exploration of what would happen to that character after a while. I think that the way that she finds out that she's actually a Myers with finding Loomis's book is fucking brilliant. That's something where Rob Zombie wrote it, and I'm like, dude, that's good shit right there. Do more of that. In the original franchise, we never got a scene where Laurie Strode figured out that she was a Myers. We found out as audience members in Halloween 2, and then she just knew in H2O. And so every single time I rewatch this movie, I try to see the absolutely like unforgivable dumpster fire crime against humanity that some of you guys claim this movie is, and every single time I seem to like it just a little bit more. And I am on an island. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have an opinion that does not work with the masses. Sometimes you find yourself alone holding a flag. Well, I'm alone, still holding this flag. I think Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is his best film. And I would highly encourage everybody that maybe has not given this movie a second chance. Maybe you only watched it back in 2009 and you haven't revisited it since. Make sure you're watching the theatrical cut, not the director's cut where Michael talks at the end. That's another thing that can go fuck itself. Watch the theatrical cut, but give it a fresh pair of eyes. Because I think that while I understand a lot of the criticisms hailed at this, and I agree with some of them, I think there's a lot about this movie that's underappreciated, a lot about it that's misunderstood, and I think it's way better both in Rob Zombie's filmography as well as amongst the other Halloween films than a lot of you guys have ever given it credit for. Well, that's it for this one, guys. Please be sure to check out Gen X Reviews and Willis Screedia's videos down in the video description below. If you enjoyed this one, check out my playlist over here of all the Rob Zombie reviews, all 8 films in depth, as well as my Halloween ranking up here if you're just a Halloween fan. Thank you so much for watching, and like and share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything I do in the future, which is a lot of Halloween content coming up. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that don't mean you have to be, motherfucker.